welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us in studio today for her annual pilgrimage to New Bedford and the Cable Access Station is Priscilla Matton, who is the Superintendent of the Bristol County Mosquito Control Commission?
Project.
Okay, I didn't have the last word there. I didn't know. Thanks for coming in again, as always. It's good seeing you. It is a busy time of year for you. First thing I always like to do, I always like to tell people, what is the Bristol County Mosquito Control Project? What do you do so that people know what you're all about?
So we service all 20 towns within Bristol County, Massachusetts, and we provide services to the residents within the county. So we can do water management. If there's standing water on your property or in the area, we can treat that with larvicides to kill the mosquitoes before they become adults. We do what we're most known for, which is our spray activities, which occur during the summer months like now. And we also do PR events like this, or we're actually working with the city health department as well to do some upcoming PR events in the city and around the area. And we also like to make sure that everybody knows that we do surveillance, right? So surveillance is very important for an integrated pest management system, because we want to know what mosquitoes are out there, what risks they project to people and animals, and what is the risk for disease in any coming year. So we need to remember, again, like we like to say, there are 52 different mosquito species in Massachusetts. Not all of them cause disease, but it's important for us to know what they are, how many there are, and what kind of risk it might pose to the public.
Where they're hanging out, who they're hanging out with, that sort of stuff.
That's very important. Actually, you say it, but it's true. You know, if these mosquitoes are hanging around with infected birds that might have Eastern equine encephalitis or Triple E or West Nile virus, then yeah, we really do need to know where they're hanging out, how old they are, and what they're doing at any given time during the season.
It's, you know, you talk about the project too. It hasn't always been around. I mean, you've talked about in the past, this is, for a government agency or a government department, it's relatively new when you think about it.
Right, we were founded in the 1959, and so we have been around for a while, but certainly things have changed, right? It wasn't until 2000 that West Nile virus came in. We've always had Eastern equine encephalitis here, but it certainly has made significant changes, not only just with what diseases are here, what species are here, those are new as well, but also our technology, right? The things that we can do, the better ways that we can make pesticide applications, the information we can gather from our surveillance to decide when pesticide applications are most important.
It's crazy to think that, I mean, you just said, and I know you've talked about it in the past, but Triple E's really been around since like 2000.
West Nile virus.
West Nile virus.
Right.
I mean, but it's like all in the news. You know, it's been in the news for years now, but it's really not that long.
No, it's not at all. And it certainly changed the way that all of our local mosquito controls have acted, because for a while there, we didn't really care about the species that was important for West Nile virus. That mosquito doesn't really bite people as often. It's not involved in the Triple E cycle, so it was just sort of a nuisance species that we kept an eye on. Now, it's very important because it does tell us a lot about West Nile virus and what's going on.
Before we get to specifics too, so we talk about that, and the only thing that comes to me is, and you mentioned too, like we've got different species and where they go and who they're with and things like that. Just, and I guess the only way to put it is climate change, and things have changed in Massachusetts and Bristol County as far as weather pattern and climate and all that, which brings us to these different species.
Absolutely. We have seen changes in which mosquitoes can survive here, right? So a mosquito is considered to be native to the area if it can complete its entire life cycle here and live all the way over wintering, right? We used to have pretty cold winters. Winters are much more mild now, so mosquitoes have been able to tolerate those colder temperatures. So some southern mosquitoes have moved up to our area because of those change in temperatures. Also, one thing that we found is that the season is getting longer, right? Starting sooner and going longer. West Nile virus and Triple E cases used to be most common in the August, September, we're now getting cases out into October. So it's very important that we remember that the season doesn't end on Labor Day, sort of when everybody goes back to school and the beaches start to get a little quieter, but that's actually when mosquito risk is probably the most highest.
And it's interesting too, because I think back as a kid and you used to, like September was really I don't want to say the end, but it was the peak and then the end at that point in time. Because the nights would get a little cooler, but you're right, September was pretty much it. And now, as you said, it goes into October, and probably a little after that too. You're probably talking early November in some cases.
Absolutely. So we have seen that when we follow our first frost, right, our official first frost, right? So minus 28 degrees for at least 3 hours makes our official hard first frost. Used to be around Halloween, right? It used to be pretty easy to tell, end of October. Now it's coming into like the first week of November, into almost the second week of November, depending on the year. So it's definitely changed in terms of how that has happened. What ends up happening though of a concern is that when we make our pesticide applications, especially our adulticiding applications, the temperature has to be above 58 degrees between 2 a.m. and sunrise. And those temperatures can go down significantly in September, right? We can have those nice, more much comfortable nights that we all enjoy, not really the hot weather that we get in July and August. So that does limit the amount of pesticide applications we can do, which does limit our ability to kind of control risk sometimes. So unfortunately, while risk is going up, our ability to actually combat it kind of goes down a little bit depending on the day.
Right, like as you said too right before, this is really the time that you're spraying and doing the applications now, because those nights aren't dropping below 60. I don't think we're recording this early July here, and hasn't hit below 65, I think, so far. But this is it for you.
Exactly, right. And this is a good time too, because we're not only just reducing the mosquito populations that have the ability to reproduce into September, right? So as we continue to make applications, larviciding or adulticiding, we're reducing the overall population, which will help us as we move into this season.
Talk about the diseases that you are looking out for. We've mentioned Triple E, West Nile. What are they?
Sure. So of importance is West Nile virus. So that tends to be more of a container breeding mosquito, catch basins along the sides of the roads, your plastic trash that you might have around your property, like your buckets or your gutters or your kiddie pools that you might not be using. They tend to be more closely related to where people are living, right? So that's more important for West Nile virus, right? And it can make people sick. You can get symptoms like headaches, stiff neck, fevers, things that you want to check in with your doctor if you think that you have any of those issues. So that's really important, and it occurs every year, right? We've had it every year since it's been here in 2000. The second disease is Eastern equine encephalitis Triple E, which is a little bit different. It's more of a specific swamp breeding mosquito that's important. It has a different group of birds that are involved, and then the activity that happens tends to start more in the swamp areas where the birds and mosquitoes are in very close contact with each other. But then as the birds move out, or the mosquitoes keep moving in and out, and we have some more opportunistic mosquitoes, those that don't really care what they feed on, a bird this time, a person the next time, we end up getting sort of bridge vectors or the spillover into human populations. So that's also very important. It tends to be cyclical. So last year in 2023, we saw activity late season. So we were not getting positives until August into September, very late season, which usually can be a sign that the following year, which would be this year, 2024, could be more active.
And I know that looking back too, as you said, Triple E cyclical, and the last 2019 and 2020 were really bad years. For cases, I know there were 12 cases in 2019 with 6 deaths. 2020 was 5 cases, 1 death, but then nothing since then, which is interesting. But as you said, it's cyclical, and everything comes around. That cycle is going to happen, and as you said, this could be the year too. We had a West Nile detection in Quincy, and I said of all places, Quincy for the first one in late June, the 25th, and then July, I want to make sure I get the date right because you gave it to me, July 1st, we had a Triple E detection on that day in Carver, right?
Correct.
Right, so they're around.
Absolutely, yes. And Surveillance takes a lot of work, right? I mean, surveillance is very difficult. There are a lot of mosquitoes out there. So to detect it, right, is really almost a needle in the haystack, right? Usually our infection rates are pretty low. When activity gets really going, right, we can have infection rates where 1 in 50 mosquitoes might be positive. In years like in 2019, we were looking at infection rates where 1 in 4 mosquitoes could even be positive in certain areas of the county. So it's very important as we continue to look at the populations and look at how much detections we find, which is why the Department of Public Health will increase risk levels, right? So they did increase the risk levels for a few of the towns within Plymouth County surrounding the Carver isolate that they found.
Do you have different, I know you have testing sites, if you will. Do you change those every year, or are they usually in the same place?
We like to keep them in the same place, and you can get historical data, right? Not just about disease risk, but you can also get population. What we end up doing is we look at the historical areas, but then we can use supplemental trapping, right? So when Rhode Island found Tripoli this year already in Tiverton, right? We can increase our trapping in our neighboring Fall River in case we want to look for samples of mosquitoes that we might not normally be looking for out of the city, right? So we do move things around, but for the most part, we like to keep our locations. And the Department of Public Health has had locations in the county, including in New Bedford, for well over 20 years worth of data.
So there's the permanent ones, and then there's the adjustable ones that you float around in case something happens, you just want to pick it up.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
As far as, so, and those tests pick up both?
Yes, we do. We test for both West Nile virus and Tripoli, right? And there has been rare situations where we have found both in one group of mosquitoes. Because when we test, we're testing anywhere from 1 mosquito to 50 mosquitoes within what we call a pool, right? And that can get kind of confusing because there was, it's a new term, right? And when we think pool, we think swimming pool,
right.
Or, but it's a pool, a group of mosquitoes that are all the same species, no less than 1, no more than 50. So any amount in that 50 could be positive. It could be 1 out of 50, or it could be 50 out of 50, depending on what you're collecting.
Some people may be watching this and, they're in the smaller towns, surrounding towns, but, people in New Bedford, like, we live in a city, there's really no country, there's nothing here that would attract a mosquito or the problems that maybe Carver has or Rochester, or the ones that were right now are in the moderate level. Why is it important for the people, whether they're watching in Taunton or Fall River, versus the people who are living in, I know Rochester's Plymouth County, but it's right next to Bristol County. Mm-hmm. Why is it important for them to pay attention as much as it is for the people in the Rochesters or Freetowns?
Absolutely important, because mosquitoes do not respect county or town boundaries. So mosquitoes of our different kinds can fly miles, right? So one of the human vectors for Tripoli, the cattail mosquito, can easily fly 5 miles, right? So that could easily take it from here to Freetown or over into Plymouth County or even into Dartmouth, right? So it's very important that we look at it based on the surveillance that we're getting in the mosquitoes that we're finding in the area. Also, because we want to look for it as easily as we can, right? We're going to try to find that mosquito where we most expect to find it. So we set our traps within those swamp areas, like the Freetown swamp, which is right on the border of New Bedford, right? Or we want to set it in the Acushnet swamp, which again is right on the border of New Bedford, because we're more likely to find it there than, say, setting it in an area where we might catch 1 or 2. We really need to catch hundreds in order to find it.
It's interesting too, because we were off camera, we were talking about the spraying program, which has started earlier, and I know it because we got the press release and we put it out there. And as you said, it ends right through the summer. But I mean, you spray in the north end, obviously I know that because Freetown's right there. But I mean, you're spraying all across the city. You're spraying downtown. You're spraying here in the south end, and people might wonder why. I mean, as you said, there's mosquitoes everywhere, but there's really not the swampland that you're talking about.
Exactly. Swampland's important for a group of our mosquitoes, but not for all of our mosquitoes. So some of our mosquitoes that are important for West Nile or Tripoli can be right in your backyard, right? So some do prefer those big swamp habitats, but some prefer those catch basins, that plastic trash that you might have around the yard, the things that you might be saving, like the kiddie pools or the bucket you have under your air conditioning to collect the water that you then use to water your tomato plants, kiddie toys in the backyard. So all of those areas, right? And then because they can fly in for miles, we want to make sure that our salt marsh mosquitoes are not bothering people in northern New Bedford, right? Or we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on what's going on just all around the area. And people are outside using the space. So it's important that we want to try to do what we can to protect people from diseases.
Right, and you say it every year, but I mean, people are outdoors right now. They're so susceptible to getting bit. It's crazy because this is the time of year we're outside.
Absolutely.
And I know in the fall, especially September, because we've talked about this in the past too, especially when high school sports, the fall sports season gets started, especially in September and now into October, kids are out playing sports, soccer, football, field hockey, whatever. They're out. You know, the weather's still nice.
Absolutely. And not only are they out, but your family's out too,
Right.
right? Because you're out watching. So maybe it's not so much the kids on the field that you're like, well, they're running around and, you know, the mosquito's not going to get them. You know, they're running, playing soccer, or football, or field hockey, like you said. But what about your other daughter or son that's playing on the playground or underneath the bleachers or just sitting there hanging around talking to your friends? You know, all of those times are areas and when people can still get bit.
We were meeting in my office before the show, and we were talking about just the weather right now so far this year. I mean, our rain levels have been up, which is certainly not good for mosquitoes. They're down the last couple months as we were looking. You know, June was under, July starting off under. But you've said in the past, really, it's the winter that really dictates. I mean, this rain doesn't help, but you know, our fate's already determined, like in January, February.
Absolutely, right? So we know for Tripoli that there's a critical time in the year prior, right around September, October, November, where those water levels produce great overwintering habitat. So the areas where that mosquito hibernates in that water. And when there's large amounts of water or areas for them to lay their eggs and be larvae all winter, it does provide some information for us on what's going to happen the following year. And this past year, you might remember it was pretty rainy, and it showed we had the highest Culiceta melanura, which is the amplification vector for Tripoli, the highest populations we've seen in over 10 years. We were getting 1,200 per week where we're normally getting 200. So definitely showed us that this is a potentially active Tripoli year. And now with the Tripoli that was detected in Plymouth in the beginning of July, it does show us that it could be continuing to point to an active year.
Is this earlier getting those positive results? I mean, does it usually happen earlier or later?
So 4th of July is sort of our target for early activity.
Okay.
So anything before or around the 4th of July is concerning. Usually activity takes a little bit longer to ramp up because you got to get the birds and the mosquitoes and the whole thing going in the swamp for us to find it. But these first detections that were found in Plymouth were found not only in bird-biting mosquitoes, but also in human-biting mosquitoes. So something that we are very interested in continuing. But what we need to do is we need to continue to find activity. So sustained activity is really important for disease risk.
You've touched upon it briefly. We've got about 10 minutes here. We touched upon it briefly, but obviously the precautions that people take, they seem obvious, but
Sure.
you got to repeat them every year.
I hope so, right? So dusk and dawn, try to avoid activity between dusk and dawn if you can. That's when our mosquitoes are most active. Dress appropriately if you can, long sleeves, long pants. not going to happen, right? It's
Not in this.
100% humidity.
I know it's especially. I mean, again, it's been early July and late June, and it's been hot and humid.
It has been, and that's great weather, so even though it's hot and humid, you could be in the shade, right? And the mosquitoes could be out because it's just great weather for them. So if you can't dress appropriate, use EPA approved repellents. So things like DEET, picaridin, oil of lemon eucalyptus, right? Check out the EPA's website, the CDC website, for information on repellents that are good. Read the directions or the label right on the bottle, so that way you know how often you need to reapply. 20% DEET will get you about 4 hours, so it depends on what you're doing. Are you out there all night at a campsite? You're going to need to reapply. Are you just sitting out for a barbecue or maybe weeding your garden or something? You might be able to apply once and be fine, but definitely read the label. And then the last D is dump or drain. So dump any standing water you have around your property.
You've talked about the sprays and what have you in the past, because there's so many out there, and there's so many. You see, I don't want to say fringe things, but like, oh, use this. I mean, it's really important to look to see which ones are the most effective.
Absolutely. So the EPA does review products that claim to have efficacy, right? So you do want to look at that, because then they have to provide health data as well. I know many people are not big fans of DEET, whether because of the smell or the oil or the concern about the chemical, but it is a widely studied product, right? We've been using it for so long. So there is a lot of data on it, and they have come out with some new different types, right? So dry, non-smelling, hypoallergenic, all these different kinds. So there's many different types that you can use now, but it's very important, right, to use something that has been EPA approved.
You wanted to touch on, too, that there's something the state is talking about, the state health department, travel-related, the dengue fever, which, talk a little bit about that, because the state has issued a warning about that, or at least an advisory about it, I guess. What are we looking at?
So the CDC just has recommended that people that travel to areas with dengue fever, which we don't have locally here in Massachusetts, is possibly having a higher outbreak year than usual. And because this is summertime and everybody's traveling, I just thought it would be something that people should know about. It's unlikely that we'll have locally acquired cases here. We just don't have the mosquitoes that are important for that. But you certainly can travel to areas where dengue is endemic and they're having an outbreak. So places like Puerto Rico or Brazil, the Caribbean, areas in Central and South America where activity is higher than it has been in the past. And then you could get sick there or get sick when you come back. So it's just something to keep an eye on. Maybe check where you're traveling to, use EPA approved repellents, and just look and see if there are anything that you should be concerned about.
You were saying, interesting enough, I mean, was it Puerto Rico you were saying? They've pretty much already hit their numbers for last year, and it's July, early July.
Absolutely. They had more cases. They've had almost half the cases they had all of last year already as of June. So certainly there's a lot of activity out there. So, you just want to make sure you moderate your risk, because, it's not always something we think about when we go somewhere. Same thing, though, for traveling right here within Bristol County or within, Massachusetts. Say I'm going to go camping in Plymouth County, or say I'm going to go out to the Berkshires. It's always a good idea maybe to check the Department of Public Health's website to see if they have any risk level changes. And there's a great map right on there where you can see the whole entire state and whether or not there's any elevated risk.
That's one thing you've said in the past, and I assume it's still, it's still big now, is that the map for Tripoli and West Nile is a lot bigger than it used to be. Southeastern Massachusetts, this used to be the hub, if you will, but it's grown north and west of us. And yeah,
it has. It has 2019 saw unprecedented activity in areas where it had never really been detected before. It certainly opened our eyes to new swamp complexes in areas. I think a lot of it has to do with ages, right, as the swamps mature, right? So our swamps are a little bit older. Maybe some of the ones in Western Mass weren't quite old enough yet, so they're just getting to the area where they're better habitat for the mosquitoes that are important.
And you were talking Vermont and places, I mean, places you wouldn't normally think, oh, I have to worry about Tripoli. Now you at least have to be cautious about it.
Absolutely, yes. Vermont had some activity right up by the Canadian border this past year. They ended up finding an invasive mosquito along the southern border, which would have been, previous years considered to be too cold to establish
Right.
there. So certainly something that we're all looking at through our surveillance.
Last thing I wanted to touch on, and I know this is not your specialty, but I saw the article that the tick population is exploding too. And again, I know this is not your forte, but you can at least give us an overview, because I know you're familiar with enough to say, hey, yes, it's out there.
It is definitely out there, right? We need to make sure that in the spring, right, we're worried about the nymphal tick. That's the very small tick. The deer tick, which is the one that transmits Lyme disease, the one we're most familiar with, has a 2-year cycle, right? So the adults come out usually in the fall. So we're going to want to watch in the spring for, making sure that we're keeping an eye on those very, very tiny ticks. And then as we move into the summer and into the fall, we'll get the adult ticks. So one of the things that's very important is making sure that when you're doing your leaves, right, your leaves are full of the favorite food of our white-footed mouse and some of our other woodland creatures, which are acorns, right? So as you're sweeping up your leaves and your acorns and all the food that might be in there, they might be moving through it, catching what they want while dropping off ticks that you're then scooping up or letting your kids jump into. So a lot of the repellents that are good for mosquitoes, like DEET or permethrin, is good also for ticks. So definitely something to consider. Also do tick checks when you come in. As long as there's no snow on the ground, we'll have ticks all year round here in Massachusetts. Yes.
Wow. Do they still have? Are they sort of in the same cycle, if you will, as mosquitoes, in that the weather in the winter determines how the season's going to be in the next year?
Yeah, there has been, because they have a 2-year cycle, it's slightly a little bit different, but there has been some evidence that's shown that if you have high acorn populations in the fall, you'll have a lot of robust small mammal populations, which means a lot of good areas, unfortunately, for those ticks to get food from. So then the tick populations tend to go up on years where the acorns are plentiful.
Gotcha. We got 2 minutes left. I want to make sure you get the information out here. The website is so important. Talk a little bit about where people can get all this information from.
Sure. So you can go to the website, which is at mass.gov/EEA/Bristol County Mosquito Control Project. You can find us at 508-823-5253, and we accept calls between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. You can call us for questions. You can also make spray requests at that number. And then you can follow us on Twitter at BCMCPMOSQ. But certainly call us if you have any questions about what's going on, and check out the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's website for updates on disease risk as well as positives that may come out.
I was going to say, the stats are updated, what, weekly, I think?
Yes. Yes, they're updated weekly unless something really significant changes and new data comes out that's really important to public health.
And for people watching too, again, this is the state website. So if you're heading out to different places on vacation, you can look at that website, and it's going to tell you, like you said, if you're going to Western Mass, it's up there. It's not just Bristol County, as you're saying.
Absolutely, right. Yeah, you can check the whole entire map and see which areas are in risk for West Nile virus or AAA.
And we didn't talk about, but it's important too, you can request a spraying for your own property.
You can, yes. You can call our number at 508-823-5253 and make a request for your own property, for any property within Bristol County, Massachusetts.
Do you get a lot of those, or?
Well, it's interesting you should ask, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll be brief. The requests have gone down quite a bit the last couple of years. I don't know exactly why. I don't want to speculate that it's private mosquito controls, people purchasing their own, whether or not it doesn't seem to be related to actual population. Like the mosquitoes we're collecting versus the requests that we should be receiving. So our calls actually have gone down quite a bit over the last few years.
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
We can't quite figure it out, right? Like there was no metric that said high water levels, high disease risk, high mosquito populations correlate very well with the amount of requests that we get.
Lots going on. It's great to see you as always. Keep us updated as the year goes along. I know we'll put up all the information that you give us, so I do appreciate you coming in as always.
Thank you so much for
good
having
seeing
me.
you.
Yes.
That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation with Priscilla, our guest again, as she is every year to get us through the mosquito season. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.